Hollow Knight Silksong is finally here. Team Cherry's sequel to Hollow Knight proved so popular that it broke every digital game store on release day. But now that the dust has settled, not everyone is equally happy with how the game turned out. One topic in particular is dividing the fanbase: Silksong's difficulty. Long runbacks to bosses, cruel platforming challenges, and combat gauntlets that never seem to end. It can feel like Team Cherry wants us to suffer. Do they? Well, yes, actually, they do. You see, challenging the player is the keystone of Team Cherry's design philosophy, and Silksong's high difficulty shouldn't have been a surprise. As I'll explain in this video, it's simply a continuation of what Ari and William set out to achieve with the original Hollow Knight.
If you could just sit there and put it on easy and the game would play itself.
It's easy to forget, but Hollow Knight was seen as a very difficult game back when it released in 2017. Not only did it test the player's combat abilities and platforming skills, the game also broke with Metroidvania conventions at the time. In most Metroidvanias from that era, the map automatically filled in as you explored, and dying would just reset you to the previous checkpoint. But Hollow Knight essentially blindfolds you until you find the merchant and buy the map from him. It was also one of the first Metroidvanias to implement the Souls-like mechanic of losing your currency upon death, and giving you one life and one life only to recapture it. Many of the Steam reviews from that time, both positive and negative, specifically highlight the high difficulty of Hollow Knight, and that also includes professional reviews. IGN called Hollow Knight an unashamedly challenging game, while Eurogamer named it ruthlessly tough, even occasionally unfair. The reviewer for Game Informer described his journey through Hallownest, going from tough love first hours to endgame bosses that put every single skill I had through the test. Kotaku's reviewer even named the true final boss of Hollow Knight one of the hardest things I've ever attempted in a video game. This was Team Cherry's intent from the very start of development. Among the list of features on Hollow Knight's Kickstarter page, written back in 2014, the game's difficulty is highlighted 3 separate times. And a bit further down, the game will be a challenging one, and we will be throwing a lot of hazards and enemies your way. That begs the question, why did Team Cherry make their first game so difficult? Well, it's not easy to find that out, because Ari Gibson and William Pellen famously give very few interviews. They basically stayed radio silent about Silksong's development for 6 years. Remember? But there's this one interview from 2018, where Ari and William show off their game at a local developer conference in South Australia. Hardly anyone saw it, barely gathering 3,000 views in its 7 years on YouTube. But this video is very valuable, because it's one of the only times on record where Team Cherry actually sit down and explain why it's so important for the player to suffer. So, in this interview, Ari and William spend some time discussing Hollow Knight's difficulty. There are 3 key results they want to achieve by challenging the player. The first one is related to exploration. In many other Metroidvanias, the map is always at your disposal, a key tool to navigate the game's world. But Team Cherry argues that this becomes somewhat of a crutch for the player. They spend too much time looking at the map instead of the world itself. That's why, for Hollow Knight, Team Cherry approached exploration in a different way. When the player first enters an area, they're forced to explore it completely blind. You have to work for the map. Not only do you have to find the merchant in that area, you also need to spend precious currency on buying it. And that map is only good for that particular area of the game. Once you enter a new zone, you're on your own again. Ari explains that this feeling of being lost in the world is one of Hollow Knight's core tenets.
The thing about getting lost is that's a pretty scary thing for a lot of people, and we have this enormous expectation on players. It requires a huge investment for them. They have to retain a lot of knowledge in their head about layouts and things like that.
Early in development, when Hollow Knight was much more linear, Ari and William even debated whether or not the game should have a map at all. But they kept adding new areas and shortcuts between zones, making Hallownest more and more open-ended. Hollow Knight grew so much in scope that not having a map was too harsh on the player. So they introduced the merchant as a compromise. By not giving the player easy access to a map of the world, they're forced to really focus on their surroundings, learning the layout of the area and mapping out the space in their head. And Team Cherry says that this extra friction is one of the reasons why Hollow Knight is such a memorable game.
People are really focused, like intensely focused on what's happening in the screen and not on that second screen. And if you've gone through that process of being lost to learning this space, then you have this really powerful connection to it. You have that understanding, and people say that like learning in games is really one of the most impactful and memorable or effective things that it can do.
Now, if you've played Hollow Knight, you'll know that the game has a massive online presence, with extremely detailed walkthroughs, a subreddit with over 1 million subscribers, and even dedicated Hollow Knight YouTubers. And if you've played Hollow Knight, you've probably also participated in that community. Maybe you looked up the location of a mask shard, or you asked a question about the best way to beat a boss you were struggling with, or you watched a Mossback video to learn more about the lore of Hallownest. According to Team Cherry, this is by design. After all, there were only 3 people with a tiny budget, so they had to come up with a way to get people talking about Hollow Knight on their own.
The whole idea is like, is there stuff to talk about? Like, are there things for people to actually say online when they play the game? Because the most important thing is people are talking about this game.
Much of the game is built with this goal in mind. For example, Team Cherry intentionally limited dialogue to leave the lore open to interpretation. At the same time, they made sure to give every area, boss, and NPC a unique name, so players could easily search and discuss them on the internet. Team Cherry even went out of their way to make sure that players don't forget them. Hollow Knight displays the name of every NPC you talk to and every major boss you fight every time. And when entering a new zone for the first time, its name pops up in huge letters on the screen.
When we talked about it, it seemed important that people would know the names of characters and bosses, so that it made it a lot easier to talk about the game.
And if you think about it, if Hollow Knight hadn't been a challenging game, this would never have happened. Would you bother to look up the location of a mask shard if you didn't really need it? Would you discuss combat strategies online if every boss was a pushover? Would you theorize about Hallownest's history if the game spoon-fed you all of its lore? By challenging the player, Team Cherry wanted to get people talking. And boy, did they succeed. There is one final reason why Team Cherry made Hollow Knight such a tough game. They wanted to make the player feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. Not in the grinding for 40 hours to unlock Darth Vader way EA means it, but for encountering a challenge, persevering, and eventually overcoming it. Sure, beating a boss tends to reward you with some geo or a new spell. But Team Cherry believe that extrinsic rewards shouldn't be the reason why you're playing their game. According to Ari and William, the real reward is intrinsic, a sense of achievement for becoming better at the game and being able to see more of it in the process.
It's like a healthy thing to have a challenge and to push through that challenge and to come through the other side and to feel like you've learnt something, or you've just had the tenacity to stick with it.
Famously, Hollow Knight does not have any difficulty settings. The game is meant to be hard. But what do you do when a player doesn't know where to go next or gets stuck on a particularly tough boss fight? How do you make sure they don't get frustrated and quit the game completely? Well, that ties back to points 1 and 2. For one, Hollow Knight's world is open-ended, so you can never really get stuck because there's always something else to do. And by exploring other areas of the game, you could find a powerful spell or an ability that gives you more movement options. Maybe you even discover a path to skip the boss entirely. Team Cherry argues that the open-ended nature of Hollow Knight is in fact its easy mode.
We do try and allow an easy playthrough of the game, but the way we do that instead is, hey look, here's a challenge over here, but if you're not up for that challenge yet, you can go this other way. You'll potentially find something there that is going to make that a lot easier. Or you're going to go and find the whole rest of the game, and you'll come back and that thing that was once difficult is going to be a piece of cake.
Now, you probably won't be able to find every item, upgrade and shortcut in Hollow Knight on your own, as they can be very well hidden. That's where Hollow Knight's community comes in. You could consult the many extremely detailed guides or ask the game's diehard fans online. After all, Team Cherry built Hollow Knight to get people talking. So, Ari and William did this interview back in 2018, talking about the original Hollow Knight. As it turns out, the points they're making apply just as well, if not more, to Hollow Knight Silksong. I'll explain why in a second, but first, a spoiler warning. To avoid spoiling too much of Silksong, I'll limit myself to the game's first act. If you haven't played Silksong yet and want to go in completely blind, I recommend saving this video and coming back once you've reached Act 2. The world of Farloom is just as open as Hallownest, perhaps even more so. That means you always have a plan B, in case you're stuck in a particular area or at a certain boss fight. As an example, let's look at the infamous Hunter's March. This is one of Act 1's toughest areas, filled with traps, strong enemies and punishing platforming sections. It's also accessible very early on in the game. Now, most Metroidvanias would lock Hunter's March behind some kind of upgrade to make sure the player is ready to take on its challenges and prevent them from getting frustrated early on in the game. But that's not how Team Cherry works. Hunter's March is so easily accessible because they want to teach the player that it's okay to turn back when things get too tough. For one, this area is guarded by Scar Guard. This mini-boss is really designed to be taken on once you unlock the dash skill. While it's possible to beat this fight without any movement upgrades, a new player without the dash is meant to struggle. Go explore one of the many pathways in the Marrow and return at a later time. Scarguard is just the start, by the way. Just like the original Hollow Knight, Silksong forces you to explore blind until you find or purchase that area's map. And even doing that is difficult here. While the other early game areas are very open-ended, the majority of Hunter's March is essentially one long hallway. You have to survive platforming sections with thorns to punish you if you fall. Then you have to make your way past tough enemies by either fighting or dodging them. And that's not all. You eventually find yourself locked in a combat arena where you have to take on 5 waves of these enemies. There's no bench in this section, by the way, so when you die, you'll have to do the entire trek all over again. Only if you survive this gauntlet, you're able to purchase the map. After several more rooms filled with thorns and enemies, you'll finally come across a bench. Except this bench is trapped, because why wouldn't it be? Sitting on it will deal 2 damage, unless you manage to find a hidden lever and disarm the trap. And we haven't even discussed Hunter's March's boss fight yet. This is another huge difficulty spike in the early game. The Savage Beastfly has tons of health, deals double damage and can summon smaller minions. And let's not forget that unless you stumbled across this secret switch, you won't have access to the only bench in this entire zone. Now, this area also shows that even Team Cherry has its limits. Chakra, Silksong's map merchant, helps you during the area's combat gauntlet. And the Savage Beastfly is locked behind the Drifter's Cloak upgrade. But these silver linings don't make Team Cherry's message to the player any less clear. Stubbornly persevering will only get you into more trouble. So swallow your pride and come back later. And you're able to. Your goal in Act 1 is to reach the Citadel, and you don't need to traverse Hunter's March or beat the Savage Beastfly to get there. In fact, you could easily beat Silksong without ever stepping foot in this green hell. In a recent interview with the ACMI, William explains that if a player suddenly hits something quite challenging, that's fine. They will have ways to mitigate the difficulty via exploration or learning, or circumventing the challenge entirely, rather than getting stonewalled. Just like Hollow Knight, every area, boss and NPC in Silksong has its own name. This lets players easily bond online over difficulty spikes, sharing their suffering with other members of the community. For example, it didn't take long before Savage Beastfly received its dedicated hate subreddit. Silksong players post memes about the boss's cruel difficulty and clips of their hard-fought victories. Silksong's high difficulty also leads players to search for tips to beat the challenge they're struggling with. Going online and looking up a guide or asking a question on the subreddit isn't cheating. Team Cherry wants you to engage with the community. Personally, I had this realization while fighting the last judge, Act 1's final boss. This encounter is a roadblock for a lot of players. Not only does the last judge have 2 phases, getting to her in the first place is arduous. The closest bench is pretty far away. You have to traverse several rooms of difficult platforming, avoiding enemies and sandworms just to get another chance. This fight nearly broke me. The climb to the boss took me ages, and I'd get hit in the process, meaning that I'd often enter the fight with less than half of my health remaining. And on the rare occasions where I was able to begin the fight unscathed, the fire attacks in her second phase proved too much to handle. So after about a dozen tries, I went to the Silksong subreddit in search of answers. r/Silksong is filled with people complaining about the last judge's high difficulty. But just as many players are willing to share how they managed to overcome this roadblock. One player shared a video about how they speedran the route to the boss. I copied their moves, and after a few practice runs, I was able to cut my runback time from minutes to about 30 seconds, without losing a single point of health. Another player recommended visiting a merchant to buy the Magma Bell, which reduces fire damage. Equipping this tool, along with mastering the runback, finally gave me a fighting chance against the last judge. And after a few more tries, I finally managed to beat her, thanks to Silksong's online community. And of course, Silksong is an open-ended game. If you're really unable to beat the last judge, there is a different route to Act 2 that skips her entirely. This route is pretty well hidden, so most people would never have known about it if it weren't for the community.
There's a really good reason for other players to go online and ask questions and say, hey, I'm having trouble with this thing, or hey, I'm lost here. Can someone help me out? And that creates so much more dialogue around the game.
And community.
And community around the game who are like discovering better ways of doing things or faster ways of getting around than if you could just sit there and put it on easy and the game would play itself.
Beating the last judge was incredibly satisfying, perhaps more so than anything I did while playing the original Hollow Knight. That's not a total surprise, because Silksong is more difficult than its predecessor. Team Cherry admitted it themselves. In the interview with ACMI, William reveals that the Scar Stalker from Hunter's March is built from the same moveset as Hornet in the original Hollow Knight. That's right, one of Hollow Knight's most famous bosses is equally tough as an enemy you can run into right at the start of Silksong. And that's because, as a character, Hornet is a lot more mobile than the Knight. She's a hunter, after all. Team Cherry didn't want to nerf her abilities for Silksong, so they decided to bring her enemies up to her level instead. Ari explains that Hornet is inherently faster and more skillful than the Knight. So even the base level enemy had to be more complicated, more intelligent. William adds that, in contrast to the Knight's enemies, Hornet's enemies had to have more ways of catching her as she tries to move away. This means that Silksong demands a lot more from the player than its predecessor. But while Silksong is more challenging, it also rewards them with less. As I mentioned before, beating pretty much any boss in the original Hollow Knight results in some kind of reward. But in Silksong, many bosses don't drop anything. They might give you access to a new area or some lore, but in terms of tangible rewards, the game is very stingy. Once again, this fits Team Cherry's vision of rewarding the player intrinsically rather than extrinsically. The feeling of struggling, improving, and finally overcoming a challenge, and as a result, being able to see more of the game, that's the real reward of playing Hollow Knight Silksong.
It's like a healthy thing to have a challenge and to push through that challenge and to come through the other side and to feel like you've learnt something, or you've just had the tenacity to stick with it, and then the reward is, look at this world that I've just stumbled upon, or look at this site, or this creature that I've met, or this friend that I've made.
Team Cherry wants you to suffer for the love of their game. If you want to know more about Team Cherry and how they make games, check out this video. It was made back when we didn't really know how the development of Silksong was going, but most information still holds true. Thank you very much for watching.